And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Black and Blue Pod. I am your host, as always, Matthew McLaughlin, here with a special guest, AJ Kohn. This guy has done incredible work over the course of 3 decades with the city of Philadelphia. We're here at the Skateboard Academy of Philadelphia, established in 2006. We're going to get into all of that. But first of all, AJ, thank you for coming on the show. How are you doing? How are you doing with COVID?
I'm doing all right. COVID, we're dealing with it the best way we can. As you can see, we're 6 feet apart from one another and taking all the precautions while we're here. We have students in here, wearing the masks and sanitizing and stuff. I go through quite a bit of sanitizer and sanitizing wipes and things of this nature. But in a lot of ways, it's been good in some ways and it's tougher in other ways. But yeah, we're making do, just like everyone else.
So that's really interesting to me because we're at the skateboard facility. How are you guys? What was the initial plan going forward with COVID? Was there any initial plan? I know a lot of businesses were having a tough time figuring that out, navigating those waters. What was your approach to how do we continue to keep this facility running?
Well, we were trying to figure out, all right, what do we have and what are the parameters? And from that, we just had to kind of build around those parameters. It's within skateboarding, we're natural problem solvers. You know what I mean? A lot of times, like when you're out there skating and stuff like that, maybe something's not quite as perfect as you want it to be, or you have people walking in the way, or you're getting kicked out of a spot, or whatever. There's a lot of different variables that are taken into account, even when you're just skateboarding, just the act of skateboarding, and like how you have to adapt to your environment. It's the same approach that we took to here. So basically what I did is I had to split up my entire square footage here and be able to kind of put a section over here, a section over here, a section over here within those parameters. And then we just kept going with that. And then we've just been up to date with everything within regards to the regulations and stuff, and just been kind of ebbing and flowing as it comes in and doing the best we can with it.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to get into the whole setup of the facility later on with the tour.
Sure.
But first of all, I want to get into you. You've been skating for over 3 decades at this point.
Yeah.
You've seen about the peaks and valleys of some skating eras.
Sure.
What has it been like to see the evolution of skating, especially in the Philadelphia area? That's a scene that doesn't get much attention.
Well, it all really depends on what you mean with getting enough attention. Maybe in some circles it doesn't, but in other circles it does. Within the skateboarding community, Philadelphia is one of the meccas, especially of the East Coast. You have New York, of course. You have Philadelphia. And you have, parts of Baltimore, but really in Atlanta and all that is when it goes big. And then there's a really good scene down in Florida. I mean, there's good scenes pretty much everywhere. Mm-hmm. But with Love Park and everything like that,
yeah.
in the 80s and through the 90s into the early 2000s, Philadelphia is a Tony Hawk pro skater. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Same with FDR, which is one of the biggest DIY skate parks in the world. And that's based right here in Philadelphia. I can only speak from my experience within regards to the evolution of skateboarding that I've seen. I started skating in about 89, 90, so it was right when it was starting to taper off. I remember seeing like all the older guys from a neighborhood and stuff skating, and they were always like the artists and like the musicians, and like they were really like the creatives were basically the skaters. And then it kind of died in like late 80s, early 90s really is when it really died. And it was hard to get stuff and whatnot, but that's when I really got turned on to skateboarding and really went for it. And it's one of those things that I may have been the only skateboarder in like a 3-town area, but when we would see somebody, they'd be wearing like Vans or Airwalk shoes or whatnot, and we knew that they were a skateboarder. And this is before cell phones and all that stuff. So we'd take down numbers, and then call them, and then we'd be like, hey, or if they were somebody from like a different state or even a different country, there was a whole network of like pen pal type stuff. So like, hey, I'm going to go to Georgia and stuff like that, and you'd send it out, or you'd send it to a skate shop, and they would tell you where to go or whatnot. You'd have like these catalogs that you could, if you couldn't get skate gear at your local sporting goods store, or back then there was very, very few skate shops per se. So there was a lot of times it was part of like a sporting goods chain, and you could get it, or a hobby store. You go into a hobby store to get like a model plane or a model car, and they'd have skateboards there too. So that's changed, because now it's become more of an industry again, where there's new shops and boutique shops and specialty shops and whatnot that are just skateboarding based. So there's that. There's more equipment available. The equipment's better than it was before. There's actually some more engineering behind it now with some of the composites that they're using now. And then just like, you know, but the core of it has been pretty much the same. It's just like going out and pushing yourself and seeing what you can do and what you bring to the table, essentially. And then when you're meeting up with others, you're getting stoked on what they're doing, they're getting stoked on what you're doing, and next thing you know, you're coming up with something new. So that's always been an evolution type of thing. So skateboarding from the very beginning, in like the 50s, and I'm fortunate I have one of my friends he's actually one of my mentors, this guy Russ Howell. He was the first pro skater, and got to be friends with him over the last 15, 20 years. And you know, he was telling me it's the same thing. Like, he is older than my father is, all right? And me and him can have this conversation like you and me are having this conversation. And he still has the same enthusiasm. He says the same vision that he had back then. And we can speak the same language. So it goes beyond all those barriers, whether it's age or race or background or whatnot. It has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with what you do. And that's the important thing in skateboarding.
Yeah, exactly. I think you said that pretty beautifully, that skating goes beyond race, gender, religion, whatever it may be. Has it been surreal to see these skaters, especially when you're looking at huge skaters like younger guys like Ashok Ware and Nike SB, these guys, like, the way skating is produced is changed significantly. Have you had any of those surreal moments where you're like, wow, I can't believe this is happening? Like you said, you were doing pen pal ideas, and now we're transitioned to social media with Instagram. Nike SB can put out a 20-second clip and it gets millions of views. Have you had any of those moments where you're like, wow, I can't believe how far this has come?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because, you know, Ronnie Gordon, who is the partner with me here at the Skateboard Academy, you know, like, I'm 42 years old, he's 44, and we toured together. And, you know, we were talking about old footage and whatnot, and one of my mentors just contacted me recently, this guy, Thierry Monroe from the Beast of the East, which was a big contest series. And he was collecting all of the old footage and putting it together. He's actually going to be putting something together in regards to our tours that we did back in the late 90s and through like early 2000s. And we look at like what we were filming with back then and what we had now, and the editing is ridiculous. I remember when, you know, and Ronnie will tell you the same thing. When we used to go out, we used to have like these camcorders that had the VHS tapes in them, and then you had high 8, and then from there they got mini DV, which a lot of people are still shooting with because they like the graininess of it, even though you can do that afterwards as well. But they like that. They like the feel of it and all that stuff. They like the look, as well as it kind of changes the dynamic of like the skating as well. It's a little grainier, but you know, some of those video cameras kind of make it look like you're going faster, or the different angles they can do. So there's different reasons why people use different things. But the fact that I think what really hit me is when we have our students here and they're trying to learn tricks and they'll videotape it, and then they go to it right away. And then if they like it, they'll save it, and then next thing you know, at the end of the day, they have all these clips, and by the end of the time, before they leave, it's already edited and it's already posted somewhere. That's what's really, and how fast it is, and how user-friendly it is. Because before, like, you'd have to take, you'd have like these two basically big machines, and you'd have like you'd have your television here and a television here, and then you'd have to put your tape in this one, you have to put your other tape in here, and you'd be cutting and splicing right there. So you're playing this, and you have to rewind and then come back to this. It was such a pain in the butt. And then and then it started getting easier. You know, you had like After Effects, and like you had like, you know, different editing programs, like Editor Pro programs and stuff like that, which were easier but still a little bit pain in the ass. Now they get on their phone and they go through it like it's nothing. So I mean, it's a double-edged sword though, because there's a lot of times the video stuff, it's so instant that people just post it up. When before, with a video part, you actually cataloged all that stuff and you waited, and then you had a launch, and then that became a big event, you know what I mean? And then it was like, then you got to see all the new tricks or what they were working on. And then you went back to your lab and started working on stuff, and then the next video would come out. So it was like one of those, so it was a little bit better paced, I thought.
Yeah.
Because now it's like people are so inundated with too much information, and I see a lot of good footage that I'm like, why didn't they wait for their video part? Because that's good footage. you know, and it's being oversaturated is what it's happening, and it's getting to the point when you see something really substantial going, the kids are like, oh yeah, I saw that, and they just swipe through it, and I'm like, no, you may have seen it, but you didn't really see it. You know what I mean? Like that trick was amazing. Like, just sit and dwell on that for more than 30 seconds. You know what I mean? Like, we used to play back videos all the time, and I mean, a good example is if you guys ever see the DC video. It was the old DC video right when they started bringing out the mega ramp, and I'll never forget it. We were at Tattoo Mom's on South Street, and some of the guys from DC came out, and I think Nocturnal was the ones who put it on over there because they were right across the street. So that was when like the skateboarding community was still like kind of in that older school type mentality. Like, we had phones and stuff like that, but it weren't like they are today. And people were videotaping, and it was better than the cassette tapes, but it still wasn't as quick as it is today. So like, we all went there and we saw Danny Way do the mega ramp, and we just like, everybody was cheering for like all the street skaters, because a lot of us, we knew them, or like we'd see them skating in Philly and whatnot. So like, you know, everybody's cheering for their boys and whatnot, or you know, their favorites. And because that took a couple of years to produce. And so that shows the work that was in it. You know, these videos now, they're just popping them out like quick little snippets. They're here today, gone tomorrow. But that actually showed work and like real dedication to that, you know. And there was a lot of trials and tribulations that went through that. I mean, if you've ever gone through that process as an athlete, like, you're just like, wow, like, this is ridiculous. This is 2 years of like blood, sweat, and tears to get this to this level.
Cut it down a little bit.
Yeah, and then we see Danny Way do the mega ramp, and we're just like, we all just sat there, and like, mouths dropped open, like, what do we do? Like, he just took skating, like, we all have to step it up, you know what I mean? But it was in that moment, and then we just took that for like the rest of the year. That took us to the rest of the year, and we're just like, all right, what else can we do? Like, how can we look at things differently? Not saying we'd all be doing mega ramps by any means, but whatever we were doing, it pushed us to new heights within regards to seeing what was possible.
Yeah, so obviously back then skating was huge. You mentioned Danny White, huge name in skating. Josh Kalis, later on, Colin McKay, some of those guys were massive at this point. Some of these lesser known skaters, I almost don't want to demoralize them, but some of the lesser known to the general public, I should say.
Okay.
Do you ever look at these clips and see, hey, I can incorporate that, or I can take some of those pieces and maybe try a trick this way? Some from a younger generation compared to just, I don't know, looking up to your mentors like you previously mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I learned from everybody. To be honest, some of my best teachers have been my students. You know, to be quite honest with you. I have my own perceptions of skateboarding. I came up in a different time and whatnot, and I have good fundamentals. I can break stuff down. What I'm focused on within my skating has been freestyle skateboarding, which you have to basically, within freestyle skateboarding, you got to compose a 2-minute run composed to music, and you can't miss. So it's trick after trick after trick, and using all angles, all axes of the board, right? So it's kind of a combination. Think of it as a combination between engineering and art. You know what I mean? It's basically that. And then you have street skating, which I also competed in. And the street skating stuff, especially like the park skating and stuff like that, is, you know, it's one of those ones that you have to keep adapting to the situations. You're adapting to situations, and it changes all the time. The variables are always changing, so you have to react quickly to it. And you're trying to connect it all together in one continuous line, hopefully, not just at the spot, but skating through the city. You know, because in Philadelphia, that's real street skating. It's not just skating at a spot. You know, whether it's be municipal or Love Park or City Hall, as it were back in the day, is that real street skating was like when you were in the streets and you were skating to a spot. So like you were skating from your house and you go down, say, South Street, and you'd be skating South Street, and then you come down Broad Street, you'd be skating Broad Street, and then you go down, and then you hit up over at City Hall for a while, and you skate there, and then you know, you do your lines or a couple things in there, say hi to some of the homies, and then you go to the next spot. That's real street skating. It's just one after another, you know, not just standing. And then you have the vert skating and the bowl skating, which tends to be more in one spot, but it takes a lot of time and dedication to be able to do that. But what's crazy is that the stuff that we show, like, you know, our students here, whether they're young or old, because we teach everybody, everybody comes at it with a different perspective. You know what I mean? Like, for me, like, being a freestyler, my background is more in engineering. Like that's me. I'm an engineer. You know, that's what I do for a living. When I'm not skating, like that's what I do, as well as an educator. So I'm looking at it from that perspective, and from everything that I'd experienced growing up. You know, so I'm looking at that perspective, and then, you know, we have other friends who are like really, you know, really good at like art, like really high-end, high-level art, and they look at it from their perspective. And then you have people who are in the trades, who do electricians, or you have plumbers. Like, you have people from all different things, and they all bring their different points of view to it, and it's all good and it's all relative. And then it's like, it becomes subjective. It's like, what do you like to do? What do you want to do? So like when we're teaching somebody, we'll teach them in several different ways, because everybody kind of processes things differently too. So from there, they process it and they bring it out. So like, I saw this one, like they came here and I showed them a trick. Like I showed them like a backside rock and roll, for instance. Real simple, going up, rock over, push down, turn. So it's a kick turn and a rock to fakie. Combine that together, you get a backside rock and roll. And the way that they were doing it was just different than like I've ever seen. You know, like they're like getting all the way down and like bringing their knee down to the thing, and then standing up, and then they actually learned how to do it front side first, besides doing front. Because they were like, oh, well, backside means my back. So they would turn this way, and they were getting that way, but they didn't understand this way, even though I showed them that, but they came out a different way. And I'm like, how is that happening? You know, so, but then, you know, I would see them like, you know, I'd show them a trick, and then I see them do a trick, and maybe they do it a little different, or maybe they do it better, you know, than I showed them. I'm like, well, that's really cool. You know, like, you know, what else can you do? And then from there, I'll start to see lines that they don't see, because they don't see themselves skating. And then they'll see stuff when I'm skating, like, oh, why don't you try this? Next thing you know, it's not teacher and student, it becomes skaters. You know what I mean? You know, the only real difference is that I've been skating for so long, and I've been able to do a lot with skating through that time, that I have that perspective and that experience. But at the same time, I'm not arrogant in the fact that I can't learn anything new, because that's contradictory to what skating is all about. It should be always learning something new. Like as I was mentioning to you before, my friend Russ Howe, he's 70, 71 now. He's been skating since like 1956 or something like that, right? He's still learning stuff new. He's still learning. He does stuff that I can't do. All right, but like, you know, for instance, like he was skating before the ollie. All right. Ollie Geflin didn't invent the ollie until like 1978, something like that, and it was on a transition. And then Rodney Mullen took it to the flat ground, right, which was like 1980, right? By that time, Russ was already a full-grown adult. In 1977, he was like in his mid to late 20s. You know what I mean? Yeah. So like by the time that came around, he was like in his 30s. You know what I mean? Like he was almost 30 at that time. You know, when that came in, or once it hit 80, he was in his 30s. And so, you know, that's the one thing he said he always wanted to learn. He can do all the flip tricks. He can do kick flips, old school kick flips. He can flip it every way you want, but he doesn't know how to ollie. You know what I mean? So it's just like, you know, and so he's, and I look at it this way, like, you know, he was the first pro that had his own pro model. And if he can still learn something, I can still learn something. And vice versa. So that's the beauty thing. You never stop learning in skateboarding.
Yeah, and you mentioned it earlier when you're teaching your students a new trick and they get it maybe the first time they try it the reverse way. How do you deal with that, or try and explain it to your students in a different way? Because skateboarding is obviously much different than any other teaching moment, like in a classroom or something like that. It's obviously much different. How do you approach a student who maybe, you know, not configuring it the right way, but you eventually do get it? How does that process work for you?
Well, it's just a different way of thinking is what it is. I've taught as well. Like I was a teacher for a while, and you know, I taught it, and you have all different types of styles of learning. You know, you have people who are visual, you have people who are audio, so they'll be able to listen and be able to figure it out. I was more tactile. Like I like to build things. You know what I mean? Like that's how I learned my math, for instance. Like I understood mathematical concepts and stuff. Like algebra, for instance, is just about problem solving. I already knew how to problem solve, and I was asking too many questions in algebra. So my algebra teacher, who was just about on tenure, was about to leave anyway, didn't want to put up with me asking too many questions or confusing. confusing the rest of the class. So they would send me down to like the art class or the or the shop class, and I'd build sets or whatnot for the plays or whatever like that. So I'd build it and I'd see it in my head, and then my teacher would show me how the math that I was supposed to be learning applied, and then it's brought to me. So it's sometimes you got to go backwards to go forwards, forwards to go backwards. You know what I mean? So I don't try to force it. I try to kind of ebb and flow with whatever that style is. So like I'll present it as a concept. I was like, this is what we're going to learn. This is the goal. Let me show you. So now they get the visual, they have the audio, right? Now I want you to experience it, right? So what I'll do is I'll break down certain movements, like for instance, the manual, which would, I don't know how apt your listeners are to what skateboarding terminology is, but just think of it as a wheelie, all right?
Yeah.
So what we do is we'd start off at like just with the tail stopped here like this, and then just squish it down. We call it squish the bug. It actually helps us learn how to drop in on these ramps. So we just do that, and I just have them go up and down. And from that motion, it naturally drags you across going forward. And I was like, okay, so we understand that. So they understand how to push down and push back up, right? So they have that control. And then by that time, they already know how to push forward and backwards. So they got that. Now it's just learning how to balance on those wheels, right? And how to pivot. And a lot of times they've already learned how to do turns, which is all pivoting this way. Now it's just keeping it straight. So what we do is we just have them do a little push, and then we'll push it down, and they'll start to feel it. And if they're having some issues and whatnot, we have different ledges and stuff that they can hold themselves on and get the feeling of it. We actually have boards that have no wheels on them. We have boards that have soft trucks on them, so that they can actually practice it without the wheels in it, so they get the feel of it, because everybody has different athletic abilities, you know what I mean? And some people who have that natural balance, other people have, it takes them a little while. But once they get it, they get it, you know? So we see who's getting it in that way, and then we troubleshoot, basically. You know, I'm talking like an engineer. Troubleshoot what they're doing, and then get them to that. And I don't try to, here it's open. Everybody's going to be like learning different ways and whatnot, and it's going to take time. So we're just trying to get them to where they want to go, and we just got to figure out what works for them, And then from there, we're not like a traditional school within regards to like you have to do it this way, this.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, it's a little bit more up for interpretation in their own way of doing it, as well as experimenting. That's the best way to do it. I mean, if anything that skateboarding teaches us, it's you're gonna fall and you got to get back up and you got to try again. So it's that perseverance and then calming yourself down and breaking it down into those pieces to figure out, all right, what am I doing right? What could I be doing better? How, what do I need to do to get to my goal? And that's stuff that we use in life in general. So we're teaching not just the act of skateboarding, we're teaching life lessons here as well that will serve them to be successful in anything that they do.
Yeah, because for me, whenever I get the impulse to go skate, my thought process is don't eat shit. Pretty much. I try not to, but obviously that's something that you're going to do in life. You're going to eat shit, you're going to fall, you're going to face plant, whatever.
Yeah.
You just got to pick yourself up and keep on going.
Right.
But as for the academy,
sure.
You mentioned Ronnie Gordon, who's your business partner in
Yeah.
this. How did this all come together? You turned pro with Ronnie in your teen years, you were telling me a little bit.
Oh, not quite teen years. It was a little bit after that.
A little bit after
college and stuff like that, yeah.
Okay.
So just a little bit about me and Ronnie. So
yeah.
I mean, let's see, I met Ronnie in like the 90s, probably like late 90s. Late 90s. I was up in a skate park called the West End Skate Park. And I worked for a skate shop called Boredom Skate Shop in Nazareth, Pennsylvania, which is kind of on the borderline of like the Poconos. I'm from rural Bucks County, like Coopersburg area, Quaker Town area. And so I used to skate all down there and whatnot. And there was this one big place, the one skate park that everybody used to meet up at. Back in the day when we were younger, it was called Cheapskates, which was down in Lyme, Lexington. And that was where like you'd have guys like Tony Hawk and like Tony Alva, like all the big guys from California would come out. And then we had some really heavy hitters growing up. So like we had guys like Tom Boyle and Parker Barrett and the Sigafus brothers and younger guys too. He actually, if he was still here with us, he would have turned 40 this year. His name was J.R. Navis, and J.R. and like Gene and like a whole bunch of guys, all from there. And they were all sponsored, they were all pro, or they were on their way up, So like we grew up in that, and it was very aggro, and it was one of those things you'd show up to the skate park and it didn't necessarily mean that even though you paid your money, didn't mean that you were going to skate. You had to earn your spot to go there. So we grew up in that type of environment. So I actually ended up running into Ronnie at West End, and I was working up there, helping them with promotions and stuff. I worked for a small skate shop called Boredom, and we would run events up there. And yeah, I ran into Ronnie Gordon up there, and he was already like doing some local events and whatnot, and people already knew who he was. So like, you know, we skated together and we became friends over the years, and we would travel to like Skater Island up in Rhode Island. We'd go down to Tampa Am every year down there, and just everywhere. You know, Beast of the East, you know what I mean? Who I ended up working for as well after West End. And that's how we got to know each other, you know, it was through skating. You know, there was times that people needed a place to crash, and it was like, or they got kicked out of the hotel room, and yeah, you can stay with us, or oh, we have a couch available, or whatever. I know Ronnie, one time I was doing stuff for the Beast of the East up at the Skater Island Am. I was the MC, and we helped organize that whole event. And we had, Rodney Mullen was up there for that one. He was one of the judges. Mark Johnson was one of the judges. This pro from Santa Cruz was from like Massachusetts area. His name was Benny Kobokian. He was one of them, and this other guy, Jim Cagney, was up there as well. So like, they were like our celebrity judges, and then we ran the event. And Ronnie did pretty well in that event too. But I needed to ride back to Philly because my guys were going to like New York and New Jersey, and I needed to get a ride back to Philly. And he lived in Jersey, so he's like, "I'll take you," and just kind of loaded up in his old, like this crazy Oldsmobile, you know. And like you could fit, like seriously, you could fit like 6 people in the front and 6 people in the back. This thing was huge.
Oh, nice.
And like yeah, so they're driving down, and everybody's bumping around, and like just having fun. So it was a lot more like you know that type of thing. So that's pretty much how we met, is through the circuit skating. And then he was teaching at Woodward, and he taught at Woodward, and he taught at the YMCA camps, the Element camps, and then he also taught at Eisenberg's in Texas. But we always kept in touch, you know, through doing contests and doing that type of stuff. So it just kind of was a natural type of thing. And basically, when he really got on board with us was about 4 years ago, when you know, he had his first child, and he wasn't allowed to go to Woodward for 9 weeks while his wife was 9 months pregnant. I wonder why, you know.
Yeah, I don't know why.
Yeah,
he would be allowed.
Yeah, so he started to run his Ronnie Gordon skate camps here, and it's been great. It's a traveling camp. The kids come here, they warm up, and then they do some stretching, and they talk about what their goals are for the day, and then they get into the vans, and they're driven to all the different parks around here, or different spots, or different skate parks, and they put in work, you know, and then they come back here at the end, and they get to chill out for the rest of the day, and then their parents pick them up, and they go from there. So it's kind of cool like that. So that it kind of happened naturally like that. I was doing stuff when I started this whole thing in 2006. You know, every year that I've ever done this, I've worked directly with the city, and I made it official. So I worked for United Communities. There's this group called ASAP, which is After School Activities Partnerships. They're the ones who do the chess clubs and stuff in the city. And they wanted something different to offer their kids. So we offered skateboarding, and they bid on it. So we called it Gear for Growns back in the day, right? So this other group that got it started. Like, we had to talk about it, and I had some ideas within it. I was on tour, and they went for it. And it was good. They did it for a good 6 months or so, maybe 9 months. And then the people who were involved in it like moved on, whether they were finishing up college or a master's program, or they got a job or whatever like that. So they didn't really have the time to put into it. Mm-hmm. And by that time, I already came back from a tour, and I kind of picked up where they left off, and then I developed it from there. So we only had one spot in South Philly, and from that one spot, we built it up into 7 spots throughout the city. Philadelphia, was it South Philadelphia and West Philadelphia primarily. And yeah, so we did that, and we built it up. We ended up doing some summer camps over at Sharswood, which is in deep South Philly, like off of like 2nd and Wolf, that area. And the guys right across from where we were doing it was Rizzo Rink, which does like the hockey and everything. And they had this big facility, and they said whenever we wanted to, we could bring our ramps and stuff over there and just do it as long as we cleaned up. We could use their facility.
Yep.
So we did. And then from that, it just kind of grew, and it was all volunteer based. Everything was out of our own pocket. I'd call my sponsors, and they'd send gear and whatnot. So guys like, guys from Skate One, which was like Bones and like Bones Wheels and Bearings and Mini Logo and Pal Peralta. They were like some of the first ones to really get involved with what we do. And then we had some local groups too, One Skateboards Formation and a bunch of other groups. And then we got involved with Skate One, which is like the helmets. So we did the helmets, and then we did the Triple Eight. So we've been with Triple Eight ever since. They're out of New York, so we like to work with East Coast groups when we can. And so they would supply us with helmets, or we'd get them at a discount, and then we just built it from there. From there, Parks and Rec found out what we were doing, and they were like, hey, we'd like to do a contest series. It's like, cool. So we did the first contest series in the city of Philadelphia called the Philly Cup Series. And it went really well. You know, we started over at Pop's Playground, which was in like Kensington area, and we went to all the different skate parks. And it went really well. And so we would offer basically, it was $5 to enter, and you got a free lunch too. You know what I mean? And you got a free lunch, and you got like drinks, and you got like snacks throughout the day, right? Because it was just something to bring people together. And that's what I love about skateboarding, is it's a real good opportunity to bring people together from all different cultures and to do something positive. So we did that, and then the next year, they said, hey, look, you know, there's some interest in doing some camps. Would you be interested in doing camps with us? I was like, sure. So they said, all right, only 3 groups want you. Right? It was all South Philly, because they all knew about me from doing the stuff for Gear for Grubs. So they gave me a chance. So I go in, it was a supplemental thing. I was only supposed to be there for an hour, and a lot of times I'd end up being there for 2 or 3 hours because all the kids wanted to skate. But I had to like spray the helmets. I only had 12 helmets and 12 boards. That's all I had a budget for. So I was rolling. You ever see like those like little shopping carts that they take like to the store?
Oh,
when you open it up and you put your grocery bags in?
Yeah.
That's what I had my skateboards in. So I had like 9 of them this way, and then I put 3 of them this way, and then I attached all my helmets around. And I would take SEPTA, because that was before I had like a car. And I would take SEPTA to all the different places, and I would teach skateboarding. So I did that with them. So it was at Rizzo Rink. I did one at Garing, which is on 16th and Jackson. And then I did it at a couple other places too. And then they were like, this was great. So then I get a call. We got good news, we got bad news. I said, all right, what's the good news? They said, good news, we want to hire you again. I said, that's great. So what's the bad news? They said, 52 locations want you, want your programming. So I was just like, well, that's going to be an issue. There's only one of me. So that's when we started doing work, you know, more with the city. So that they hired 2 other adults. I was in charge of them. And then we would have, and then they would be in charge of all of our youth workers. So the youth worker group in the city of Philadelphia, you start at 14, you can work until you're 17, and then you have to become an adult worker. Mm-hmm. And then, but you become you became an employee of the city. So if they want to go into any other city job, they're already got their foot in the door. You know? Yeah. So it was a good way to do that, and we did it as an outreach. So to not only get them to learn about how to interact with people and how to talk to people and do civic duty, like doing cleanups and painting and graffiti and all that stuff, but also we taught them trade skills too. So we taught them basic masonry, basic carpentry, how to put boards together, you know, that type of stuff. So basic mechanical skills that they needed to learn that they could take into whatever they wanted to do. And you know, some of those kids who grew up and now they're adults now, like we have one that's in HVAC, we have another one who's going to be a cop, we have another one who is going to college, you know, like they all go into different ways, but at least they have at least something on their resume now that they say, oh, well, I did this, and this is what we did, and they have verifiable like proof, like, look, and this is what we did for our city to make our city better. You know, it gave them a good source of pride, because a lot of the people that a lot of the kids especially we'd hire were from like these rougher neighborhoods, you know, and they needed a way out, and skateboarding was their way out. So it just gave them that. So then we started doing building summers. Actually, this one right here, this mini ramp right here was built by some of our students. So we cut the sides and stuff. The sides were already cut and stuff. It was donated to us by a skate shop that was unfortunately going out of business. And they had the sides, but we needed to have it fit in here.
Yeah. So
they had to cut the flat bottom, and then they had to be able to connect basically connect the dots and drill everything and all that, and then layer it. So, and it was something that normally, like, you know, for somebody who's built something, this would have taken, you know, an afternoon, really. Yeah. You know, for them it took them a few days, because we gave them the parts and we said, try to figure it out. And so they would do it, and they'd have the holes all lined up right, but they would have this part of the stud and this hole, and then put it down in this one, so it'd be crooked.
Yeah. Well,
so then they would try to keep adjusting it. They couldn't figure out how it was. So I'm like, all right, well that does not going to work. So, and then they discovered, oh, that's what it was. So I was like, all right, you got to take it apart, put it back together again. So they did it, and then same thing with the layers. It's several layers of material here. So we gave them a bunch of materials to use. Like, we want to see what you guys can do. Mm-hmm. So they're like, oh, well, say it has to be 3/4 of an inch thick, something like that, like a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch thick for the top.
Yeah.
So they tried to do it with 3/4 inch. And I don't know if you've experienced with 3/4 inch, but that's pretty thick material. And they tried to bend that, and they realized they couldn't bend it.
Yeah.
So like, all right, well let's try it with half. And half was a little easier, but it still wasn't there. So they started using quarters. Mm-hmm. And then when they realized they had to use quarters or 3/8 or whatnot, then they realized they could bend it, tack it in, and then go from there. So it was a learning process. So like they would only be here for like a few hours. They'd spend like about 4 or 5 hours, sometimes 6 hours, depending, figuring it out. And then we'd have Ronnie, who's a woodshop teacher as well. He was taking them through that process, and then showed them how to cut the coping and how to set the coping and do all that type of stuff. So that opened it up to those doors as well. And then it was just one of those things that people just kept hearing about what we'd done. And so that started then from going into Parks and Rec. We started doing more and doing like the little clinics. Then they hired us to do camps. So we did like 2 full weeks of camps over at Rizzo since then, and up to, unfortunately, this year we couldn't do it.
Yeah.
But I mean, we were still going on with it. And then, we were starting to do shows with the Franklin Institute, teaching physics and mathematics, and then science, technology, engineering, art, and math, and how that applies to skateboarding. It's like, how is skateboarding a STEM activity? Mm-hmm. And we break it down. And a friend of mine who I looked up to as well, this guy named Dr. Bill Robertson, aka Dr. Skateboard. They flew him out, and well, he was the dean of students over at Texas El Paso. Okay. University of Texas El Paso. Yep. But he was a longtime skateboarder. He's been skateboarding as long as I've been alive. He's a doctor. He has like multiple degrees in all sorts of stuff. And he specializes in talking about how STEAM and STEM can be relayed to people who are not, maybe not as like, book, ready, but that are more tactile learners, you know what I mean? And there was a whole thing of him taking his kids from El Paso out to a skate park, and he taught them science and physics and all that stuff. And these were kids who, some of them are, did all right in school, but a lot of them, like, they weren't interested in school, and they just were like, yeah, I don't want to do a worksheet or whatnot. But then when they got to the skate park, then they understood how it was. So they were talking about centripetal forces and centrifugal forces, and then talking about like, energy conservation and things like this too. And like, when they're going up, like, they go up and they do like a blunt stall, and then they pop it in, so kinetic, and then right when it stops, it's not kinetic, it's static, and then they come back in, it becomes kinetic again. And they were totally understanding all these concepts while they were doing it. But then when we were telling them, like, hey, he was telling them, like, look, this is what you're doing. Oh, light bulb went off, and that's how they went off. Fuse connects and it goes off, right? So we were doing that same thing with the Franklin Institute. So we would do like a display over at the Science Festival out like in the Parkway. And then ever since then, we were doing clinics in the Franklin Institute, actually inside the Franklin Institute, teaching these concepts, and then we've done it at different parks and whatnot. And then we started doing shows. I did the first skateboard science tour nationwide in 2011, 2012-ish, and did that nationwide, and it was still going up until this past year, with some other guys who were involved in it, some of my other students who came up, like Edwin Brader and a few of the other guys, they took that tour over. And then we parlayed that into other shows and whatnot, and that's how we made our living for like 8 years. It's just doing skateboard shows and STEAM or STEM shows. That's basically what it was. And this is just an offshoot of that, because I had all of this equipment from doing demos and stuff from all those years, and I needed a place to train. And after we taught the lessons for Parks and Rec and all the other groups that we were working for, the parents were like, hey, like, we'd like a place for them to come and learn some more. And at the time, we were working for all the different skate parks. So we were doing like lessons up there, but all the skate parks, as you're probably familiar with, the indoor parks, all got closed. Mm-hmm. So there was this void, and well, I already had the stuff here, and I already had the space, and I was just like, well, maybe we should just open it up and start doing it that way. When I first got the space, it was called the Collective Philadelphia, which was like an event space, So I had stored my skate ramps in the back here, and I had not as many as I have now, but like I stored them in the back, and then I'd bring them out when they weren't doing events, and I'd train. And that's basically me and my team would train here, and then it blossomed into something else, And then we started the Skateboard Academy as an indoor facility in 2017, and that's when 2016, 2017. It was right around that time, and that's when Ronnie Gordon got involved with me, and we've been working together ever since.
So, can you just kind of take me back to that first STEM tour in the 2011, 2012, what you were mentioning about, just to kind of get that reception, because I think that's a really cool concept that kids who may not necessarily, like you said earlier, turned off to STEM in the classroom, but when they get to skating, they really enjoy it, and they're clicking with those concepts. What was that reception like? What was that tour like?
Okay. Well, that tour was long, and it was an experience. As I said before, my friend Dr. Bill, he was the one who really kind of created that whole concept of building STEM around skateboarding, and he would do tours in the Southwest and whatnot, but nothing to this extent. So it was one of those things that it came about with in regards to, there was a friend at the time who worked for an edutainment company and saw me skating and was just like, hey, there's a lot of physics in it, because he's really into science and whatnot. And I was like, yeah, no. And he's like, well, can you explain it to me? And I said, sure. And I explained it to him. And he goes, oh, wow. He's like, you really have a good handle of it. And I was like, well, yeah. And he said, well, what's your background in? He said, did you just skate? And I was like, well, yeah. But I said, I'm an engineer. And he's like, oh, that's why. So we started talking, and he basically told me, he's like, look, he goes, if you can come up with an idea, like a curriculum, all right, and you can break down X, Y, and Z concepts that we'd like to cover, because that's what the schools are looking for. We'll put it out there to the schools and see if it sells. It's like, sure. So put something together. It was for a 40-minute show, and we put it out. We were working for one of the biggest edutainment groups in the country. So we presented it to them, and it was something that they thought they could sell, and they put us on. So basically, it was only supposed to be 20 some odd weeks, and it was only supposed to be 100 shows or something like that at first. It ended up being 34 weeks and 350 shows in 40 states, and we're traveling about 50,000 miles, all by car.
Nice.
And we had a brand new, they gave us a brand new Prius V. It was when the Prius V first came out, so it was the bigger one. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But because we had all this equipment, we had to take the back seats out of a brand new car, and we had to retrofit it so that would fit all of our stuff in. So the ramps that we used were all modular ramps that we could fold up, or we could put in, and we'd take the legs out, whatnot, and slide in. And basically, we were riding down the road with all of our DJ equipment, all of our skateboard stuff in the back, with our backpacks or whatnot for our clothes, and then we'd have the grind bar basically go from the back all the way up to the front to where the shifter was.
Nice.
So basically, you'd put your arm. The armrest was the grind bar, so we would just shift from there. So that was crazy. So yeah, I did 40 states in 34 weeks, and the reception to that was great. It was unbelievable, really. I think we did the math in regards to it, and we outreached to over 250,000 students, and all types of students. We did public, private, and special needs schools. So it was really cool. And then we even did when we got into the Southwest, we even did reservations and stuff too. So I was on a lot of the native reservations and stuff. First Nations people and whatnot, and I'm part First Nations as well. So it was a real good experience to kind of see some of that and see some of my roots and whatnot within regards to that aspect of my life, but also just to be able to outreach to people who, for them, they never even saw a lot of assemblies, because they were out in the middle of nowhere, literally in the desert.
Yeah.
We went to this one. It was in Second Mesa, and it was Second Mesa's in Arizona. So we started in Flagstaff, which is all trees, right, and like evergreens and whatnot. And then you go down into Phoenix, which is kind of like Florida. It's flat. It's got palm trees. It's got sand. Whatever. You know, it's basic.
Yeah.
Within regards to like visual wise, it's like Florida. And then you go to Second Mesa, and you're just driving, and you're driving, and you're driving, and you just see these big like things in the distance. You're like, oh wow, that's cool, little rock formation. You don't realize that rock formation is 30, 40 miles away from you. And then you get there and you see it's like this big monolith right there, and you just keep going. So by the time we got there, one of the first places we went to for the First Nations was the Hopi Res. And we get on the Hopi Res, and there was nothing for like 2.5 miles of driving, nothing around there. And thank goodness we had a hybrid, because we were running on fumes. And we get to the Hopi Res, and we're like, yeah, we're looking for a gas station. I'm like, oh, there's a gas station here. Well, it all depends on how good the show is. It will tell you what it is. So we're like, all right, no pressure, right? So we go in and we do it, and you know, with Native kids, culturally, it's a different type of show. They're very respectful. They are very reserved usually. So when we do something, you get a response, but it was kind of like we weren't sure if they were into it or not. And then they got really into it, and then we had some talks and whatnot. But I'll tell you what, that was one of our best shows, because the kids were super hyped, and a lot of times at the end of the shows, we'd give high fives to everybody, and every single one of those kids gave us high tens. You know what I mean? So we're doing high tens all the way out. And it just like, but we was stuff like that all the time we'd run into, whether it was on a res or if it was at a regular school. Each audience was different, and they brought their own energy, and it got you stoked to go to the next one, you know? And so, I mean, that was a really eye-opening experience. What also was eye-opening about it is it really showed me visually the discrepancies in education as well. I mean, there were some schools, we were their first, and now think of this, we were there in some of the schools, this was like in some of like the Title I schools, you know, that are in rougher areas. We were their first science component ever. Like, there's schools that don't even teach science, you know what I mean? So like some of the schools we went to, like down south, or like, you know, like in Virginia or even further down and whatnot, we were their first taste of what science was. They were focused on reading and math, and that was it, which is kind of counterproductive, because if you have to have science to be that go-between. Yeah. You know, because if you get them interested and stoked on something, they're going to read more about it, which helps with their comprehension and with their reading ability. And if they are interested in science and whatnot, math is the language of science, so it goes hand in hand. Yeah. You know what I mean? And the fact that we were their first science component, it really, those light bulbs that we were talking about earlier, that's exactly what we saw a lot. It was, and I traveled with this guy, Tristan, who was a biology major, you know, and he actually learned how to skateboard out there when we were out on the tour. He never skateboarded before. He was 25 when he went out, and 25 grad student, and then he came back as a skateboarder, which is rad. So we had a lot of adventures and stuff. There was a couple of close calls, like when you're driving through Oregon and whatnot, and they're like, your next stop is over here. And you're like, oh, wait, that's only an hour and a half, right? That's only if the mountain that you have to drive up around is passable. Yeah. And if it's not, you have to drive 3.5 hours this way up and then cross. You know what I mean? So needless to say, we tried the mountain. And we're in a Prius, and everything's going good. We can fit it through, like, under trees, do all that stuff. And then we get to the top of the mountain, and it's 75 degrees at the bottom, and there's snow at the top of it. Nice. To the point that we couldn't pass. We couldn't go any further. I mean, it's a Prius, you know what I mean? Yeah. So we had to back this thing up and drive up, and there's no guardrails, mind you, right? Nice. And my colleague was driving at the time, so he would back up, and you see the ground starting to crumble underneath, and he was getting freaked out. So I drove down the rest of the way. And that. So, I mean, there was times that we would run into that, and there'd be times that we ran into other skaters. Like my friend Mike Rogers was doing a big event down in Atlanta. He does like this cancer benefit for people who have cancer. He was a sarcoma cancer survivor, and he's like a legendary skateboarder, and survived it. You know, he's removed his eye, removed a bunch of stuff, had facial reconstruction. had a brain lift, the whole nine.
Oh.
And and to this day, he is cancer free. But he was doing a big like art show, there. And we happened to run into him. We just happened to be passing in, and they were coming in, and I was skating at a park, and I just hear, "You, buddy," and I look, and there he is, and it was kind of like one of those like free flowing type of things. So it was cool. We met a lot of cool people out on the tour. When people found out what we were doing out on the road, they thought it was really rad. And the teachers, that was really what was really cool. Is the teachers, a lot of the educational staff would come up and like, "Yo, we want to do more hands-on stuff." Like just the fact that you showed them this, and then we get them involved in it too. So we had like different things that they could participate in, being safe, of course.
Yeah.
But to show about like centripetal forces and like why you have to spread your feet out on a skateboard to keep your balance. So we'd have somebody like stand on one foot, and they have to keep their center, which is, we'd say their belly button, for instance, over their foot, and then we just tap them and they'd fall over.
Yeah.
Like, why is that? So it's only because you have that much surface area. Now we got to spread it out, and then we showed. And then like they stand like a skateboarder, and we went like this with them, and they got to see like how they could move without falling over, and everybody thought it was a great show because they could visually see it and they could understand what that felt like, right? So like, all right, that's cool. Then we talked about like safety with the helmets, like why is it important to ride a helmet, especially when you're first starting, and about distribution of force over time and space. So we'd have everybody take their finger and push it into the head. And does that feel good? They're like, no, not really. Now take your hand and put it here and push as hard as you can. Does that feel better? I was like, push harder. And they do it, and they're like, yeah. I said, does it hurt as bad? They're like, no. It's because it's distributing force over time and space. So we'd also do demonstrations where like I'd fall, and I'd show them 3 different ways of falling and spreading out the force, and that's how skateboarders stay safe. Because there's like this misconception that skateboarding is dangerous. And yes, anything can be dangerous if you're not sure what you're doing. But when you break it down by the physics and stuff like that, you realize a lot of these things that people think are dangerous, it just comes down to physics. And if you understand the physics involved and you're respectful, you can do anything, really. And we even had this one, there's a blind girl who was at one of the shows. And of course, she could not see it. She was hearing it, and she heard all of her stuff, and she came up and she's like, oh, that sounded like a really good show. So we did something with her that we didn't do with anybody else. So her teachers were there, and I had a board with no wheels, and I got her on the board, and being able to do tic-tacs and to be able to spin and be able to walk on the board and do different things and do pop-ups, just so she got that feel of it. And the teachers saw that, and they were like, wow, we didn't think that this would have been accessible to her. And I was like, of course it is. You just have to look at it from a different lens.
Yep.
And as a skateboarder, we look at everything through a different lens. So even the way we teach, it's hitting all the stuff that they're teaching in a traditional setting. It's just in a different way or different application. So the response to it overall was very, very positive, to the point that it was one of the best-selling shows for that particular group for like 8 years. We were able to hire like a bunch of people to do that one. For me, I did it 1 year. I was the first one to go out there and stuff, and the skating wasn't the hard part. It was the traveling, being in that car, because we would drive to a place, and then we'd set up, and I'd do like, say, 2-3 shows, right? And then we'd have to pack everything up and go to another spot and do another show or 2, right? And then pack that up and then drive another 2, 4, 6, 8 hours to the next one. You know what I mean? And then we would just crisscross. And it was a lot. That I went out 210 pounds. I came back 175.
Wow.
So it gives you some perspective of like how much. And then I'd only have 1 day off, because after I would do all the schools, we would go to skate parks. And that's how we went from doing 200 shows to 350 shows, because they would see us, and then I'd explain stuff to the kids and to skate with them and show them some tricks. And then the parents are like, what do you guys do? Started that conversation, gave them our pamphlet of information. Mom started talking, and next thing you know, we were booked for that. And there was a couple places like in New Mexico. We were there for a whole week. Wow. We stayed in the same town for a whole week. We did all their schools. Wow. We did every single one of their schools, to the point people were coming up on the street. Hey, what's up, Mr. AJ? Hey, Mr. Tristan, what's going on? You know what I mean? So it was like, we became like, I don't know, for a small minute, like, mini celebrity, you know what I mean? With in regards to like, oh yeah, that's the guy who jumped over, who did a kickflip over my principal or something like that, you know what I mean? And you know, stuff like that, you know. So it was really rewarding. And then we'd run into skateboarders all the time. Like we'd be eating and we'd see kids skating out in the parking lot in like Missouri, for instance, in the middle of winter, and it was like 20 some odd degrees outside. I'm like, what the heck? And I'm like, dude, I totally remember that when I was a kid. So we'd go out there and talk to them, and you know, their mom was with them and whatnot. So we were like, hey, you know, come on in. And you know, I think it was at Taco Bell. You know, we went to Taco Bell or something. We saw, and we just started talking about skating, and they told us where all the good spots were, and we're like writing them down, like cool, and you know, we still in contact with some of them. You know what I mean? They still like hit us up from time to time, which is really cool. So yeah, that's basically that. And then once we did that tour, it proved that it was viable and that we could do it. And you know, we broke that into, we didn't just do skateboard science, but we also did, which is physics and mathematics and stuff through skateboarding, but we also did health and wellness, which is called Skate for Life. And talk about mind, body, and spirit and stuff. And we do that from K to 12, you know, in all the schools nationwide, you know. So, up until COVID. So, yeah.
Well, speaking of COVID, just to kind of wrap up this part of the interview.
Sure.
What is the plan for the Skate Academy going forward? Obviously, we've heard news of a vaccine. Who knows how effectively that'll work? That's for other people to discuss.
Sure.
What's the goal for Skate Academy moving forward? Just for people who do want to come in, people who may want to get in touch. What's the plan?
Sure. I mean, well, as you can tell, we're very much about science. You know. So you know what we'll do is anybody who comes in through here for the time being and stuff will be wearing masks. We ask anybody who is not feeling well or whatnot, or has somebody around them that you know, to come at another time. So we do that stuff. We only do like our weekend programs here. We've only really ever done weekend programs here, you know, as community style. So we went from having say 4 or 5 sessions a day to 3. So we'll have one session that's like for an hour and a half, and then there's an hour in between. So we clean and we wipe down everything and spray everything and do that. So we'll continue to do that. We've always prided ourselves on keeping a really clean facility. It's important, especially when you have people's parents coming in here. That's another thing too. Like parents are always welcome here, and we always have parents here, always. 1 or 2 instructors at all times, and always parent presence. The kids are never alone, you know what I mean? So it's like there's always people around to help them out along their ways, as well as, you know, kids are forgetful. You know, they'll be talking or something comes off and whatnot. So, you know, but as you'll see when we go through the tour, we separated it into sections so that we can have up to 3 or 4 in one section, 3 or 4 in another section, 3 and 4 in another section, and then we rotate them and switch them. But before they even come in here, they wash their hands. All that, they put their stuff down, they go wash their hands, they come in, and then we have sanitizer throughout, that they sanitize throughout when they're doing it. And that's what we can do, you know. So we do that. That's when we do indoor stuff. We also do a lot of outdoor stuff too. So a lot more people are a little bit more keen on being outside, even though it's getting colder, which is fine with us. That's how we did a lot of our after-school programs this year. Instead of having them here, we had them in rec areas or playgrounds, like where nobody was. So like school playgrounds, you know, for instance, or what was the other one? We did down at like Rizzo Rink area, and then there's a couple of them. They're like, hey, we have a street down, we have an alleyway and a street that's nice and paved and whatnot. We're the only ones who use it. You can do it there for the local kids there. So we do. So the parents come out and they're drinking their coffee or whatnot to keep warm, and the kids are moving, and everybody's good, you know. So we've been doing that. So again, we adapt with what's given to us, you know. But we're already set up to do skate camps, our traveling skate camp again, with the same regulations as we did this past year. We did it with masks. So they come in, they wash their hands, They get into the car, they're wearing their masks. They get out to the skate park and whatnot. They could spread out and stuff. That then was a little bit more laid back, you know. So then after they were out of the car, they could, they could take off their mask if they wanted to. But that was different regulations. We pretty much go with the regulations and we adapt to what we need to do, you know. So that's pretty much where we're at with that. And then for like our school shows and stuff like that, we've been doing live feeds, as well as we've also been doing pre-recorded stuff. So we're recording stuff here, and then our agents are selling it out to the different schools. So each school can say, hey, I want you guys to focus on X, Y, and Z because this is what we're focusing on teaching, and we'll do a show based off of that, and custom show for them, send it out. They get the informational content that they need, and everybody else gets paid, and it's good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So people are starting to work again, which is good, and that's the important thing. Because, I mean, just here alone, like, we're able to, from just working with the city, whether it's Philadelphia or, like, Abington or the other ones, right? We hire, like, at least a dozen instructors every year through the cities.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's, we're hoping to be able to continue doing it because, people make part of their livelihood doing this, and I made all of my livelihood doing it off of the shows. So it's like, it's hopefully we'll be able to adapt to the point that we can get, to there. As it results to a vaccine, I think it's good within regards to that there's that, because let's face it, most people, especially in the U.S., they want a pill or they want a shot, and then it's one and done. You know what I mean? So and some people like that, but then there's other people who are like, they have valid concerns within regards to the safety of said vaccine. And there's a lot of things. It's interesting. I don't know, like, which your background is or your listeners' background in, but it's like, it's based off RNA and similar to CRISPR. So I'd suggest that people kind of look up like what CRISPR is all about.
That's all genetic sequencing, correct?
Genetic sequences. So think of it like just coding and stuff like that. And then basically what it's doing is it's saying, this is the piece of the puzzle we want you to cut out of the equation. So there, your attack cells in your body go up and down, those strands, and find it, cut it out, and then you can basically insert something else that you want to put in there. And it's like that. It's very similar to coding. Like if you're into coding at all, it's very similar. It's just, it's still relatively new, and the long-term effects, are still like debated. You know what I mean? But the science seems sound. So hopefully it'll give people relief, and I guess we're gonna have to wait and see. You know what I mean? How effective it is. They're saying 95%, which is pretty huge. That's usually never happens with a vaccine, but if they're doing it in this different way, and it proves to be safe, it could be really good. And I think a lot of people want something like this because, let's face it, the majority of people here, they want to do what they want to do and when they want to do it, and it's been 9 months. You know what I mean? So I think like this might be a good option for a good amount of the people, and hopefully it's a big enough amount of the people that we can start getting back to normal. You know what I mean? Whatever that means.
Yeah, exactly.
Whatever that means. But again, we ebb and flow and go with it, so whatever is what is, but I like to focus on the science aspect of it.
No, yeah, because obviously now that's a huge question mark, is how do businesses move forward, because we've seen multiple really huge numbers of businesses struggle amidst this pandemic.
It's huge. I mean, just in skateboarding alone, I know shops that are no longer going to be in existence.
Yeah,
straight up, they're not going to be in existence. Even like the way when they shut down everything, even to get boards have been impossible to get. For the longest time because of the production and whatnot. So like the production is slowed, and the demand for skateboarding has gone up because everybody's at home and they want to keep their kids busy doing something. So skateboard's a good option, but you have all this demand and you don't have enough supply. So that's starting to drive up all the prices of all the skateboard stuff. So I mean, for us to bring certain brands in, we'd have to sell those boards for like $70, $80. You know what I mean? Just to bring certain brands, key brands in. Yeah. Because otherwise there's no margin. You'd make like a shop would make like $5 on the deck. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like,
barely breaking even at that point.
You would. You'd be better off paying somebody $5 when they come through your door. You know what I mean? You're not even breaking even. You're losing money. Yeah. So it's like, that's why like we try to focus more on the service aspect of it. We do have a small shop, and that helps facilitate like some of our clientele. But we do. We're not like a specialty shop. There's a couple great specialty shops right down the road that we recommend a lot of people going down to, like Zembo, for instance. They're a great group of guys and gals down there, and you know, they have a little bit more of a selection. But to get kids just started, or like people who just want like a complete ready to go, they come here. You know, or some specialty stuff, like I do freestyle stuff nobody else does, so I'll do that and a few other things. But I basically do the stuff that nobody else is doing, you know, or focusing on the people who are just getting into skateboarding and focusing on that. But yeah, it's been tough all the way around. But yeah, I hope it gets better, because there's a lot of people hurting, for sure.
No, yeah, definitely. We pray for all those people who do own businesses, people who have lost loved ones to COVID and all that stuff. That's terrible, and hopefully we can get back on the right track with this vaccine. But
Yeah.
moving on,
Sure.
I like to wrap up sort of my interviews. We're going to do a tour. This isn't the end of the interview, but
Sure.
I like to wrap up my interviews with a lightning round segment I like to call Off the Dome.
Sure.
5 lightning round questions. So
Sure.
first of all, to start off, favorite album or artist to skate to?
Favorite album or artist to skate to?
Like you're going out to skate. You have your phone or whatever. What are you throwing on?
It really depends on my mood. I mean, I've been really getting into things like Fela Kuti, which is kind of like Afro funk type stuff from like the 70s. I like them. There's a couple different bands that I like that are more like instrumental bands and stuff. I'm really into those guys. And then there's times like when I really just like, if I'm like really need to like get work done, I'll go back to like my old set when I was a kid. So like listening to like Black Flag or Fugazi or you know, things of this nature, old school Metallica, Slayer, you know, things like that, stuff that will get you really energized to like get going, you know what I mean? Like more aggressive stuff, Agnostic Front, things like this, Pennywise, things of this nature. Budos Band has been one of my favorites lately. It's called the Budos Band, Budos. More instrumental funk type stuff, but it just gets you going, you know what I mean? It just it sounds like, you know, like when you're like cruising down the street, you know, and just pushing and just get you into that zone. So yeah.
Do you have a favorite skate shoe?
Skate shoe? Well, I ride for Etnies, so Etnies. So no, one of my favorite skate shoes, the one I'm riding right now, is the Jocelyn, the first Jocelyn that came out, the Etnies Jocelyn.
Were you more of a physics or math kind of guy in school?
In school?
Yeah.
I would probably say more physics. Like math, I was more applied math. You know what I mean? So like I don't know. There was something in school. Like when I was younger, I like had like highest honors in math when I was younger, like in elementary school. And then when I got to like middle school, high school, I kind of lost interest, and I got more into the physical aspects of how things worked. I would always take things apart and whatnot, and I could understand how they worked, but just don't ask me like the equation of how that's represented. I can express it through building it, or I can understand the concept. But like to write down the numbers, maybe I was turned off by some of the teachers that I had, but I would have to say it was more of an applied type of thing. So I'd say physics, for sure.
Yeah. And just to finish up with this segment, what was your first impression of Hippie Mike?
Hippie Mike?
Yeah.
Oh, you know about Hippie Mike?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, no way. I didn't know you knew about Hippie Mike, man. Hippie Mike's the man. Like, he's an interesting character.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I met him, like, you know, it was like he comes out and his eyes are just like wide open, like all the time. And he's really intense, but not in a threatening way. He's just intense and just like, I just came out of the woods way, you know what I mean? And now Hippie Mike's good people, man. Like he's building a park right now up in Canada.
Wow.
So he just raised a whole bunch of money up there for it. But Hippie Mike, man, like he helped do the platform for he helped with the freestyle events that we've been running up in Canada. He was really a part of like the Vancouver scene and everything like that. He was an accomplished skateboarder in his own right, you know. And but guys like Andy Anderson, that was his boy. Andy Anderson comes from Hippie Mike, Ryan Brynjolfsson, and a few other guys. Like they produce some good skaters from up that way. But yeah, I never had a problem with making Hippie Mike, man. We always had some good conversations and just, you know, had some good laughs.
Yeah.
Good people, man. That's crazy. How do you know Hippie Mike?
Because I saw you did an interview with you in 2013. It was with the protest movement, and I think you were doing a demo at that time, and he was doing like a backstage. Like
that was for the World Championships. That was for the World Roundup that we do every year in Vancouver. in British Columbia. Yeah, so he did a lot of our video. He does a lot of the video stuff as
Okay.
well as some of those background. He had his own blog and he had his own talk show, kind of like what you're doing. Same thing. You know what I mean? But yeah, no, he's an interesting character. He's got all sorts of kids too. Like he's older. He's I think he's a little older than I am, and he's got kids and they all skate and they all got long hippie hair. You see the whole hippie battalion coming through, and yeah, man, it's it's going to be a good time when they show up. For sure. All right, well, welcome to our main space here. Everything that you see in here is all modular, so we can reconfigure this in any way that we want to for anybody from who's a beginner all the way up to professional level. So as you'll notice, you'll also see some lines on the ground. Due to COVID restrictions and stuff, we have to keep people separated, so we can have 4 people in each of these sections. So we can have a total of 12 people in here, but we usually just keep it to 10 because we want to make sure that everybody has enough space. So you guys to take a look around and see all the different transitions and different configurations we can do here. Again, every time you come here, it changes, a little something different, a little something for everybody.